I was listening to a podcast talking about how people in the future, say 50 years from now, 100 years from now, might look at us. You know how we look back 100 years ago, 200 years ago, and we think, oh, how quaint. I can't believe that they lived like that. So how might people in the future look at us? And one of the things they said was, there was a number of things, but one that really struck me was, they believe that in the future, people will look back on us as being very quaint for eating meat. Can you believe that? I thought, maybe that should be a New Year's resolution, that we should give up meat. No, not going to happen. Okay. Yeah, I don't know if I can do that either. Here's the thing, though. New Year's Day this year, it's just Monday. It's just a day of the week, right? What does it even matter? And yet, I do think that it can be helpful to have a marker. And I'm kind of glad for that. I'm glad for an opportunity, not just to have a day off, and I know not all of you can have a day off. Some companies are open on New Year's Day. But it's good to go beyond just the day off, the family, the food, football, and think. Think about a new year, a new normal, a new you. It's a new start. Sometimes we just need a new start, and it can be helpful to have that line where we say, all right, I'm beginning again. It could be devotionals. It could be, maybe it should be the gym, Kev. I don't know. But when we think about New Year's resolutions, actually we might be jumping the gun a bit. Because before we create a new resolution, we need to evaluate the past year. Maybe we evaluate the past year or past years, and we realize that we don't need to change anything. Maybe we're actually on a good trajectory, and that's okay. But maybe we realize something small or something perhaps big does need to change. But to determine that, we need to do some evaluation. So how do we evaluate our lives? Well, just as with anything that we measure, we have options. When you're taking your temperature, for example, the magic number is, that's right, 98.6. But 98.6 what? Michelle was recently working with one of the Seeds families that came for our ESL classes that we hosted here at Faith Church, and their child was sick. Big difference between 98.6 Fahrenheit and Celsius, right? I want to make sure you're reading that thermometer correctly. The same could be said for driving. If you're in another country that uses the metric system, kilometers per hour, and you're looking at the speedometer and you're going by the normal miles per hour, don't be surprised if you get a ticket. I don't think the police officer would say, but officer, I was looking at miles per hour. That's what I'm used to. And he'd be okay with that. So when we evaluate our lives, we can use evaluation tools, measurement systems that will give us very different results. What measurement tool should we use? Now, during Advent, we have been studying Psalms, a variety of genres of Psalms, and they were all designed to help us prepare for the celebration of Christmas, which was the first coming of the King, so that we might also prepare for the second coming of the King. And now today, I have one more genre of Psalm to help us think about preparing for the coming of the King, specifically to help us evaluate our lives. Because it is God's Word that is the ultimate evaluation tool for our lives. And so turn with me to Psalm 49. If you're reading one of the Bibles in your pew, it's page 456, Psalm 49. I think you're going to see that this particular genre of psalm, which by the way, it is a wisdom psalm, is something that can really help us evaluate our lives. Psalm 49, page 456. Here's verses 1 through 4. Hear this, all you peoples. Listen, all who live in this world, both low and high, rich and poor alike. My mouth will speak words of wisdom. The meditation of my heart will give you understanding. I will turn my ear to a proverb. With the harp, I will expound my riddle. Now, basically, the psalmist is just giving us an intro here, saying, listen up, everyone. And what he has to say is for low and high, rich and poor. And notice the diversity of those groups. Low and high refer to social status. Rich and poor refer to economic status. And so whatever he's about to say, he wants to make sure that all people of all status are listening. These words are for everyone. We can often filter ourselves in the world. What I mean by that is we can say to ourselves as we're hearing something, maybe even from the Bible, oh, well, that doesn't apply to me. You ever done that? I don't think that applies to me. And then what we do is we turn off our brain. We stop listening and we ignore it. Well, this psalmist is concerned that his readers will ignore the wisdom that he has. They might tune him out. They might think they know better. They might think that these words are for others, not for themselves. So let's not give in to that particular temptation. If the psalmist is saying that this is for all people, then you and I need to hear this. And what is it that we need to hear? Well, first, the psalmist tells us the category that he is about to talk about. It's a wisdom category. These are words of wisdom. They are meditations from his heart. And the psalmist says specifically that they will give us understanding. He is very clearly saying, this is a tool to help us measure our lives. That's exactly what we're looking for here at the beginning of 2024. We're looking for wisdom and understanding so that we can know who we truly are, to see if there are any resolutions that we need to make for 2024. Now, many people, when they hear those words, wisdom and understanding, they have a pretty good idea of what they're referring to. And so, let's not give in to that temptation that says, I already know what is wisdom. I already have understanding. Let's hear the words of this psalm from a place of teachability, humility, that says, Lord, I want to know your wisdom and understanding better. Likewise, let's not assume that we're already living in a wise and understanding way. And the whole point of evaluating ourselves is to check up on how we are living. Are we really wise and understanding? Are we really living rightly? It's probably a mix of yes and no for those questions. So what the psalmist says throughout the rest of this psalm is that he's going to give us some further information to help us evaluate our lives. Now, wisdom and understanding, those are classic words from the biblical book of Proverbs. So it's no surprise that the psalmist says that he actually has a proverb for us. But remember that a proverb is not a promise. A proverb is actually a wise saying that's almost always true. You will find exceptions to the rule. But proverbs, for the most part, are these wise sayings that we would do well to build our lives upon. And so the psalmist begins his proverb, his wisdom and understanding, in verses 5 and 6 with a question. Here is the question. Why should I fear when evil days come? When wicked deceivers surround me, those who trust in their wealth and boast of their great riches. He begins with the topic of fearing evil days. It's kind of popular in our culture to describe the days as evil. Have you ever heard people say that? Man, these are dark days. Things are just getting worse. Very popular for our political candidates to say that kind of thing, to try and draw us in. We're listening to a news report recently where it showed a political candidate talking about how crime is on the increase, and it listed these various crimes in various cities. But then the news report said that actually, in 2023, crime dropped in all those categories and in all those cities. Things got better. We need to hear that. Because it's very popular for us to think with fear that I don't want to be raising kids in this world. I can't imagine what my kids are going through raising their grandkids in this world. Many people just assume that things are getting worse, and that can be the focus of their heart and their conversations. It's fear, fear, and more fear. Now, it would be, I think, impossible, or like scientifically impossible, to actually prove that things are worse. But that kind of proof is not what people are interested in. Instead, when people say that things are getting worse, they're just simply communicating what they have been told by others. A lot of times it's from social media. And sometimes it's communicating what they have personally observed as well. And so that personal opinion of fear that things are getting worse is real to them. Some of you might have that personal opinion that we're living in evil days and things are getting worse. So what the psalmist is bringing up here is actually quite common. Many humans fear evil days. But notice, he frames it as a question. Why should I fear evil days? He doesn't answer the question yet. He only describes the evil a bit further. He describes the evil days like this. He is surrounded by wicked deceivers. And specifically, these wicked deceivers trust in their wealth and they boast in their great riches. And when I read that, I thought, boy, that really sounded American. Trusting in wealth, boasting in great riches. I mean, that really defines a lot of our American experience. We swim in the waters of capitalism and materialism and consumerism and the economy. Did you see the news lately that the Dow Jones broke 37,000 for the first time ever? A couple weeks ago. Consumer spending index is strong. The unemployment rate is low. And when we hear things like that about a good economy, because that's all the news has been in the last month or so, good economy, we feel good. The rest of the world can be burning, but our American economy is strong, and that makes us feel good. But the psalmist is quite negative about people who trust in their wealth and boast of their riches. In fact, he calls the people who trust in their wealth and boast of their great riches, he calls them wicked deceivers. And they're surrounding him. And he's actually saying that the evil days have come precisely because the wicked deceivers, these people who trust and boast in their wealth, are surrounding him. A deceiver is someone who tries to fool people, giving an impression that their lives are great. It's as though the psalmist is saying, I am surrounded by people who are saying out loud, we have such great wealth. We are awesome. We have things figured out. We're steady. We are solid. We've got it made. And the psalmist asks, why should I fear this? I kind of get that. I kind of resonate with the question that the psalmist is asking. And maybe you too. Have you ever felt that? Being surrounded by wicked deceivers. Surrounded by people who trust in their wealth. It can bring on an unsettled, fearful feeling. You know why? Because it's so easy to compare our lives with theirs. It can seem that we're surrounded by these wicked, wealthy deceivers. And even if they're not, purposefully attempting to attack us with their depictions of the good life, if we aren't careful, we can feel the fear because we know we don't have what they have. We wonder deep down inside if we're going to be able to pay the bills, to retire comfortably, to have a peace and joy in our lives, and we fear we won't. We can fear that we won't measure up. We can fear that we don't have it made like those people clearly have it made. And we not only fear that we don't currently have it made, we fear we never will. Do you see where the focus is? On ourselves, on our complaining, drenched in fear. Now, I'm not saying that everyone experiences that fear, but some of us do. And we can feel as though we are surrounded by success and the good life, when it feels like so often we are not experiencing that ourselves. Instead, what we so often feel is maybe we're experiencing failure and the not so good life. Now, of course, our feelings can be exaggerated. We can really dwell on the negative and make life to be far worse than it actually is. But those feelings of fear are real, nonetheless. But notice what the psalmist says. He's questioning, why should I fear? Actually, this open-ended question leaves us with the possibility that maybe he's saying there's another option. Maybe fear isn't the only choice in this world. Maybe there's a way to look at this situation of being surrounded by these success stories without fear. So let's see how he answers the question. Here's how he begins to answer his question in verses 7 through 9. No one can redeem the life of another or give to God a ransom for them. The ransom for a life is costly. No payment is ever enough, so that they should live on forever and not see decay. So what the psalmist is saying is this. We cannot say, I redeem another person's life. Which is another way of saying, I give my life so that another person doesn't have to die. We can't say that. We can't say that to God and then hear God say, oh, okay, sure. Now you'll die and the other person will live. They're healed now. They're okay. We can't do that. There is no amount of money that we could pay to God so that God would say, thank you for this $1 billion. You have now purchased an upgraded body and you will not grow old anymore. There is no fountain of youth. Science is working on it. I mean, maybe it'll make some progress. But for the foreseeable future, what the psalmist is saying here is obviously true. We will all die. He makes it very clear in verses 10 and 11. Look at what he says. For all can see that the wise die, that the foolish and the senseless also perish, leaving their wealth to others. Their tombs will remain their houses forever, their dwellings for endless generations, though they had named lands after themselves. How many of you can tell me the names of your parents? I would hope everybody. It's pretty obvious. Some of you have your parents right here in the room with you. How many of you can tell me the names of your grandparents? Probably pretty much everybody there as well, right? My little grandson calls me Pop Pop because I wanted to be called Pop Pop after my grandfather. And he calls Michelle Grammy because that's what Maya Hershey called Cheryl Robinson. These are both individuals in our lives who we very much loved and admired. And so we came up with those names before our grandson was even born. Now our grandson, once he started talking, it was really easy for him to say Pop-Up. I love that. This tiny little guy, able to say that. It was not easy for him to say Grammy. For the longest time, it came out Gibble. But now he's got it. He can say Grammy. But Pop-Up and Grammy are titles. They're not our names. Here's the thing. If you ask him, what is Pop-Up and Grammy's name? He knows our names too. Joel and Michelle. I think he's going to remember those names for the rest of his life. At least I hope so.
But I don't know that he knows the names of his grandparents. Great-grandparents. Many of his great-grandparents are still living. He's going to spend a lot of time with them because they're only in their 70s, some of them. How many of you know the names of your great-grandparents? All of them? That's starting to get a little more difficult, isn't it? I know the name of one. I have 8 great-grandparents, and I can name one. My mom's grandfather, we called him Pappy. He was a miner from Wales, England, who emigrated here in the 1920s. His name was Bert Lewis. I don't know his wife's name. I don't know any of the other names of my great-grandparents, and there's another 7 of them. Now, I once did a family tree that went back that far, but I'd have to dig it out of a closet somewhere, and then I could tell you the names. So think about that. Of my 8 great-grandparents, I know one name. Memories are fleeting, aren't they? All those graveyards we have in our community. You can decorate the graves of loved ones for a while, but will your grandchildren do it? Will your great-grandchildren? No. They almost certainly will not. Even people with means, people who paid money to name things after themselves, will be forgotten. Just down the road is Thaddeus Stevens College of Technology. Who was Thaddeus Stevens? I know some of you can tell me. But can you all? Who was he? Anybody you don't know? Some of you. He is one of the most important historical figures from Lancaster. But when we Lancastrians travel, you go to faraway places, oh, where are you from? I'm from Lancaster. We don't talk about Thaddeus Stevens. We talk about the Amish probably, right? So who is Thaddeus Stevens? He's got a school named after him, and for good reason. There were 2 really important historical figures that existed around the time of the Civil War, both from Lancaster County. Thaddeus Stevens, in my view, was by far the most important one, not President James Buchanan. And if you want to know why, I'd be glad to tell you. But I'm not going to right now. My point is this: names are fleeting, even for famous people, even for rich people. And that's exactly the psalmist's point. Look at what he says in verses 12 through 14. People, despite their wealth, do not endure. They are like the beasts that perish. This is the fate of those who trust in themselves and of their followers who approve their sayings. They are like sheep and are destined to die. Death will be their shepherd, but the upright will prevail over them in the morning. Their forms decay in the grave, far from their princely mansions. That's really sobering. My dog turned 9 years old earlier this month. It's likely he's only got a few more years to live. That's to be expected, right? Dogs live 12 to 15 years, give or take, and they die. It's sad. It will be sad when he dies. Many of you have experienced that, but eventually you get past the sadness, and sometimes you go out and get a new dog. Some of you go out and get a new dog, and you've done that many, many times over throughout your whole life. It might be harsh to say this, but there can be a sense of disposableness when it comes to animals and pets. But we don't think of humans like that, do we? We see a higher dignity and worth in humans. And yet, here the psalmist says, humans are like beasts who perish. His point is this: no matter how much money you have, it cannot help you avoid death. It's an undisputed fact of life. It's so obvious, actually, that we could point and say, okay, psalmist, we get it. You're not telling us anything new here. Where are you going with all of this? He is actually going somewhere. In verse 12, he hinted at it when he said, this is the fate of those who trust in themselves. It's kind of a parallel to what he said earlier in verse 6, where he said that the wicked deceivers trust in their wealth. What's at the heart of this proverb is a faulty placement of trust. It doesn't matter if we trust in ourselves and in our abilities to generate wealth, to try to preserve our lives, or make a name for ourselves. The reality is, we will all die. The fact of our mortality reveals that humans can succumb to a faulty placement of trust. The psalmist is saying it is faulty, it is unwise, it is lacking in understanding to trust in ourselves. Likewise, it is unwise to trust in our wealth. So what should we trust in? Look at what he says next in verse 15. But God will redeem me from the realm of the dead. He will surely take me to himself. He points to God. If we want to live with wisdom, with understanding, the psalmist says that we focus on God who is our Redeemer. Our heart, our mind, our decisions will lean towards him when we focus on him. Our heart and our mind and decisions will not lean towards the deceptive ways of trusting in wealth and trusting in ourselves. So here we have a distinct contrast with verse 7. Remember there? Look back at verse 7. The psalmist said that no human, no matter how rich, can redeem the life of another human. But now in verse 15 he says that it is God who can redeem us. And so therefore our trust should not be in the accumulation of wealth or insurances or any kind of assurances to provide for us. Our trust should be in God, in giving our lives to him for the purpose of his mission. And when I say our trust should be in God, I am not simply saying believe in him. I'm saying we show we believe in him by giving our lives to serve him. Now, I'm also not saying that the only way to serve him is to somehow get into full-time professional ministry. That's not what I'm saying. The vast majority of Christians need not become full-time professional pastors or part-time pastors or missionaries or that kind of a thing. Instead, most Christians will serve God in many other ways, both inside the church family and outside of it. What I'm saying is, the work that we do has dignity. When it is ethical, working unto the Lord, work ethically with gusto, but do not work so as to trust in money. And this is why the psalmist concludes as he does in verses 16 through 20. Do not be overawed when others grow rich, when the splendor of their houses increases, for they will take nothing with them when they die. Their splendor will not descend with them. Though while they live, they count themselves blessed, and people praise you when you prosper. They will join those who have gone before them, who will never again see the light of life. People who have wealth but lack understanding are like beasts that perish. Notice he's saying, it's not wealth in and of itself that is wrong. Wealth is neutral. It's wealth that lacks understanding. It is people who place their trust in wealth rather than God. It's people who believe that wealth can redeem them rather than God. That's the issue. And so we began by talking about needing an evaluation. Looking to the words of this psalm of wisdom for evaluation. One of the ways the psalmist invites us to evaluate our lives is asking, why are we fearful? Is it because of the wicked deceptions around us? Is it because our hope and our focus, our trust, is on ourselves and our wealth? The question then we can ask ourselves is, what can it look like for us to place our hope and our focus on God and the ways that he and he alone can bring redemption in our lives? To do that, I encourage you in this new year to make the mission of God your priority. No matter what your situation in life is, make the mission of God your priority. Now, I'd be happy to talk with you about what that might look like, but you don't have to talk with me. I think, though, maybe it would be good to talk with someone. Someone who could help you to evaluate your heart, your mind, your desires, and which way are they leaning? Are they leaning more towards yourselves and trusting in yourself, or are they leaning towards trusting in God and his redemption and mission? Because our heart, our mind, our desires, those are the essential deep parts of our lives. And we do not want them to be deceived. We do not want them to be caught up in fear. And we might need loving, gracious help to answer those questions. We might need evaluation and accountability from people we trust who love God. There's an ancient tradition called a rule of life, sometimes used in monastic orders, but it's something that all of us could apply to our lives. When you create a rule of life for yourself, you're essentially creating a biblical guide for your life where you are at in this particular season of your life. And you're making goals, very much like resolutions, and setting pathways for how you want to live. And there's tools online that can help you create a rule of life. I once used a workbook that was incredibly helpful about creating a rule of life. It was actually required for one of my doctoral classes. It was so good. The idea is this, that as disciples of Jesus, we want to create guidelines and habits and practices so that every area of our lives are following his ways. Our intellectual areas, relational, physical, medical, financial, careers, families, friendships, church family. What can it look like for us to have a rule of life, a guide, resolutions in all those areas so that we are following God's wisdom and God's ways rather than trusting in ourselves or wealth? Because God's ways are good. They'll be for our benefit as well as the benefit of the people around us as we pursue his mission of helping people love him. And so the heart behind a rule of life is trusting in God. It's saying, God, I want you to rule my life. It's trusting in him, wanting to live a life that shows that you trust in him in as many areas of life as possible. Clearly, we won't always do this perfectly, but the hope is that each year, as we evaluate, as we apply God's wisdom to our lives, we'll move away from trusting in ourselves and trusting in our ability to generate wealth and move more in the direction of trusting in God who redeems. That will involve change and growth in new areas, perhaps new ways of life. But it'll be change and growth knowing that it's based in our God who loves us beyond what we could ever imagine. So perhaps this year, you maybe don't just want some resolutions, but maybe a rule of life. I'd be glad to share resources with you if you want to start a journey into creating a rule of life. A workbook that I've used, there's others as well. There's free resources that are so helpful with this. So let's talk about that. Feel free to contact me, pull me aside. I'd be glad to talk about what it can mean to create a rule of life so that our lives are moving in that direction of trusting in God evermore.